On behalf of NUM International College and our Social Innovation Lab here, we're very pleased to have our Paul Herman as our guest speaker this morning. And in the US, where Paul is contacting us from San Francisco in the evening. So Paul is a globally recognized leader in investing that pursues positive impact and profit. He founded and leads HIP, Human Impact and Profit Investor, which licenses more than 125,000 impact investment ratings of stocks, bonds, hedge funds, retirement plans, including 401ks. With 50 global experts, Paul is co-author and co-editor of the Global Handbook of Impact Investing, which was just published in 2021 by Wiley. Paul's 2010 book, The HIP Investor, Making Bigger Profits by Building a Better World, is included in 28 university MBA, MPA curricula worldwide on finance, capital markets, and impact investing. Paul and the HIP team have advised leading companies, including Walmart, Nike, Cisco, Charles Schwab, on measuring sustainability and how it drives business value. Paul is a graduate of the Wharton School of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania, advised boards and executives while with McKinsey. Born in Chicago, Paul has traveled to 40 countries and currently resides in San Francisco. So we're therefore very pleased to welcome Paul to deliver his talk this morning on how to invest for higher impact. So Paul, I will pass this over to you. I guess I need to make you a co-host for the screen sharing. So let me just do that right now.
Okay. All right, and while that's getting set up, good morning, everybody. I see some familiar names who may have traveled to San Francisco, so it's good to see your names, and maybe we'll see your faces during our visit together. So I am Paul Herman, catching up to you on Friday night here in San Francisco, California, United States, where we appreciate everybody's patience around the world while we transition, hopefully, to a more mature, more sustainable, and more positive leadership in our country. So I apologize on behalf of us for any pain or stress caused the last few years. So today what we're gonna do is focus in first on this new book. I know everybody's here to learn. And so what's really exciting is that this new book, it's my second book. This one is, I'm a co-author and a co-editor, but there are 50 authors as part of this book and from around the world, including in China, as well as Asia and Africa, Latin America, Europe, and North America. Nobody from Antarctica, so we missed getting all continents. And the book's available now in print, becoming available in print, but since we're all sustainable on this phone call, you may be interested in the ebook. That ebook is available on Google Play, Amazon Kindle, and the Barnes & Noble Nook, and you may find it elsewhere. And it might be better to get it as an ebook because it's very heavy. So it's 1,300 pages. It's larger than the Game of Thrones first book. In this book, it's a great way to learn, and we're going to talk through some of this in our conversation this morning. There are issues like how to invest to be fossil fuel free. And so we'll talk about that in a few moments, since we need to stop producing as much carbon as exists and even go negative carbon. And so some very innovative bonds, there's actually one chapter each on each of these bonds. Green transition bonds, so to take companies using coal, oil, and gas and transition them to more efficient business models and energy models. Social impact bonds, which you may have read about, that were initially started in the United Kingdom, and that attaches repayments of financial instruments to actual human benefits and social benefits. There's climate impact bonds to attach those to greenhouse gases and greenhouse gas reduction. And And so that's the value of nature and how we put a value on ecosystem services. Yeah, right. So this is maybe, whether you saw it or not, this is part one. So 50 authors, 30 chapters in ebook. And this is a high level overview of the book. So we just talked about part three, the value of nature, and how we actually don't pay nature. Most of what we get from nature is free. Water is generally free. What we pay for is the delivery of water, not the value of water. We don't pay bees for pollinating. We don't pay the sun for the energy it creates. And so one of the emerging fields in impact and impact investing is called ecosystem services. And about 20 to 21 years ago, a group of professors including ones from the Netherlands, actually put a value on ecosystem services, the value of nature. And what they calculated at that time is for every $1 in global GDP that we think is, positive production, there are $2 of nature. And so if we actually applied, if nature charged us for what they deliver us or what we take from nature, if we paid the true cost, all businesses would be unprofitable, because many businesses are not sustainable. They have a negative impact, not a positive impact. So what's really exciting for you as you're learning about impact investing is how to seek out models that might be investing in sustainable farmland, not just farmland, but sustainable farmland. And farming is a way to copy nature. And when you copy nature, nature doesn't have waste. Somebody's waste in nature, like when a cow makes manure, other creatures eat that. So we don't throw it in a garbage or put manure in a landfill. It's actually part of a system. Today, we sometimes call that a closed loop system. Nature doesn't make waste. Nature makes complete systems. Yet as people, we think we're smart and we make waste systems. So there's a whole part of the book on that. And this is one whole domain. And everything I'm going to talk about, these are, as you continue your journey in investing, in learning, in operating organizations, these are specialties. So these are new specialties today that you can specialize in. And that's one of the values of the book, is one, to go through the whole book and say, what's interesting to me? Do I care about people, like in part two? Do I care about gender lens investing, where there's equal opportunities for women as well as men? Do I care about diversity, how to make sure that all diverse groups get an equal opportunity? Do I care that we pay people in a fair way and we value people as assets, like you hear many CEOs say? Do I care about nature? Do I care about measuring the impact? And how can I measure that in a systematic way? And how do I bring, as Jeff and I were just talking before we got started, how do we evolve the accounting systems forward to quantify that value of people, of planet, of trust? Do you want to specialize in a certain area around the world, in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in Europe, in Northern Europe, in Southern Africa? So there's examples of that in the book. And then one really, again, intuitive, that maybe our mothers would say, how come you don't invest this way? Place-based investing. How do you maximize the impact in a locality from farming to manufacturing to services that include schools and funding students to learn and grow school skills, and then not move away, to stay in that community. And then you're living this today in the final part of the book, what universities are like in the future, or how financial services change in the future. So the book is endorsed by many people from around the world, including in Hong Kong, Annie Chen, you may have heard of. She runs RS Investment Group. She's a very active impact investor. Dr. Andy Cooper in the middle runs Leapfrog Capital, for those of you interested in how private equity and private investing can happen. Leapfrog Capital is fantastic. Rosemary Addis is based in Australia. She's the chair of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investing, where impact investors come together, like Amit Buri, who's listed here from the Global Impact Investing Network. And then there's even some former prime ministers who've endorsed the book that are now running the Innovation Fund in Finland. So there's many ways to apply impact investing all around the world. It's not just stocks and bonds. It's not just venture capital or private equity. Impact is everywhere. And if you're saying, oh, where can I buy the book? You can buy it online, as we covered, and in Asia, it's already stocked in Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, Jeff, in case you're interested, and Australia, New Zealand. All right, so I'll pause here for any questions on the book. Otherwise, we can move to the next phase, but happy to answer any in chat or live.
And as you said, Paul, it's also available on Kindle. So I already have the Kindle version. So that's
right.
the easiest way for us to get it.
Don't get a callus on your hand from the 1,000 pages. Okay, so we're going to switch gears here. And so we're going to talk about impact investing. Again, either speak up, live or in the chat. Steve, if you can help me watch the question box or the chat box. And I like starting here because, in investing, you never get enough pictures or even people. So this is a visual. We almost use this for the cover of the book. But what surprised me when we tested this visual with some people, they're like, that visual is too scary. So what's really important now and always is to be honest, and to be honest about what our challenges are so that we can be honest about how to solve those problems. And what's scary about this visual is people did not like the left hand of this visual. They're like, ooh, that looks intense. Well, this is what the world might look like if we don't solve our problems. And so that's motivating. So fear of a world where the land is parched, where the sky is dark. I've been in Hong Kong on some of these days where at 2 p.m, the sky looks like that, and luckily it rains, and at 3 o'clock it looks like the sky on the right. So we need to build systems, education systems, manufacturing systems, economic systems that are mimicking of nature and that look more like the right, which we all enjoy the sky on a day that looks like the right, and hopefully avoid a sky that looks like the left. And at HIP, one of the things that we do a couple of things. We rate investments on whether they're more like the right or more like the left. It's actually a 0 to 100 point scale. And 50 is the middle of the picture. And so 50 and above, so anything to the right half of this photo we think of as net positive to people and planet and trust. And anything to the left is net negative. It's extractive. It's not paying nature. It's not creating a closed loop system. It's not paying people a fair wage. So as Steve introduced, this was the first book that we wrote. It's The Hip Investor, also available on Kindle, also available as an audiobook if you want to practice listening to English. It's not me reading the book. And it's a how-to guide to help you think about how to decide on investing. We rate investments. We manage money. We manage strategies that invest in stocks of companies who are positive impact. We put together portfolios and manage those portfolios, including for retirement plans that are fossil fuel free, that rip out carbon out of, that support companies that have a positive environmental impact. And we do this for hedge funds. We do this for large fund managers. We do this for families and foundations like college endowments and 401k plans. And then we write a lot with the media, the Financial Times, the New York Times, and the like. And we've been doing this for a long time. Our longest strategy is going to have a 12-year track record starting in July. We have a couple of anniversaries, one this month on the Fossil Free 100. So I think it's actually, yeah, it'll be tomorrow, I think, is the anniversary for that, the 9-year anniversary. And the 9-year anniversary for the Sustainable REIT will be next month, the Real Estate Investment Trust. Okay, and then just so you know, because we're talking about finance and investing, everything we're going to talk about is for your information. None of this is an investment recommendation. Do your own research if you do that. And as we learn in finance, and as Jeff would have taught you, past performance is not indicative of future results. Just because something was successful in the past doesn't mean it was successful in the future. And that's what makes investing fun, because you have to sense, look, envision, forecast the future. And over time, you figure out whether you're right or wrong at certain things. And you're not even right all the time. I'm not right all the time. I'm lucky if I'm right. All right, so one of the most pressing issues, and feel free to chat any questions along the way. One of the most pressing issues today is carbon. Carbon is part of nature. It's on the periodic table. If you take chemistry, it's right there. It's number 14. Now, you may be driving around in a car, you may be on a scooter, or you may burn a fuel to heat your home. That molecule of carbon that comes out of that survives for about 100 years. And so the more carbon that we put out, the more it accumulates, and it takes 100 years for that to degrade. That's why you might hear about carbon capture or carbon sequestration. But it would really be great if we never have to make carbon in the first place. And so what's happened through the Industrial Revolution and globally we've all grown, but we really haven't done it in an environmentally efficient way. We've done it in an economically efficient way, many ways, but not really an environmentally efficient way. Nature would never have grown in this way for so long. And now nature is fighting back. That's why we have climate action and climate change. And so the Paris Accord, which I'm proud to announce, the US is re-entering the Paris Accord after a short break with the globe. You can see that conceptual line here about the Paris commitments. But what we really need is to go much further. We need to reduce the carbon we produce, and we need to get it out of the air. Now, most of the world deals in Celsius. So these numbers that you see here are 2 degrees Celsius, 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. In the US, we have Fahrenheit. And so this next chart that I'll show you is trying to make that more clear for everybody, whether it's Celsius or Fahrenheit. And so to get to this 2 degrees Celsius, or 3.6 degree Fahrenheit, if the world is the same temperature as our body, which it's not, but if we use that same frame, an extra 2 degrees Celsius to your body temperature gives you a fever. So when we're talking about all these numbers of, is it a 2 degrees Celsius world? Is it a Paris Accord? Is it a 4 degree world? Just think about your body. And anytime that says another 1 degree Celsius, add that to your body temperature. And at these lower ones, this is like a low grade fever all the time. Hopefully nobody suffers from this condition. But without taking any carbon action, we're headed for this higher path. And this higher path would give you a deep fever, and it probably would kill you. And it would kill a lot of the systems, natural systems on Earth, and it might even kill us as a human species. The Earth will survive. The question is, what species will survive? So this is our challenge in our lifetime right now. What we have to do is in every type of investment, work towards what's now being called a science-based target. So there's a website called Science Based Targets Initiative. It's organized by 4 nonprofits. One of those nonprofits is the Carbon Disclosure Project. There are other nature-based nonprofits. And there's now more than 1,000 companies around the world, including in Asia, that are committing to reduce greenhouse gases by a certain year. And actually, in the top right part of this graph is 3 companies are committing to, that are listed, their stocks are listed in the US, are committing to 100% by 2030. meaning there will be no net, any carbon will be net negative after 2030. That's what Unilever, which sells products like shampoo or toothpaste that you might buy, or Novo Nordisk, which makes vaccines for, makes pharmaceuticals for diabetes and diabetes treatments. So those companies in the top right are the ones pursuing a carbon neutral or better world. And everybody else, while they've done an amazing thing to have a science-based target like Levi Strauss and Blue Jeans, or Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company, or Dell Technologies, the keyboard company, all these goals are fantastic in that they want to reduce carbon, but they're not saying they're going to zero carbon. So this is actually, these companies are leaders, but they're not leading enough. So the challenge in any investing is how to find those leaders, like in the top right, and how to support ones working towards being sustainable, and then how to avoid the ones that are not, or help the ones that are lagging get into the game. Questions so far? This is like really tangible. You can look this up. You can search for companies that you know at Science Based Targets Initiative, but any questions so far? Nope. Okay. So a company like VF, some of you may know VF, it's an apparel company. It has a supply chain, including in Asia, to grow cotton, to maybe assemble clothes in Bangladesh, to sell those clothes globally and around the world. On the left are three things that they've committed to as they pursue eliminating zero, as they pursue zero waste, as they make their buildings certified for LEED. So LEED is a global designation as to whether a building is sustainable, whether what their energy usage is, their water usage, the quality of air, what types of sustainable materials. And then VF actually has plants assembly in Cambodia, as well as Bangladesh and India and Vietnam next door and China to the north. So, and then also in Kenya, in Africa, and Lesotho, which actually that may need to update the, I know Lesotho and I think it's Swaziland in South Africa are mountain kingdoms. So, and to answer the question, the deck will be shared afterwards. So if you're scribbling notes, scribble notes for your own preference, but I'll share the slides with you. And I see that VF is doing donations to Cambodia. So happy to learn more about what they're doing in Cambodia and not only hiring workers, but also making donations. So why you might feel good or better about VF is not only the results on the right, but the strategies on the left. A circular business model where the circularity, like we talked about closed loop systems, is to make it to have no waste, to scale for good. So how do we help incomes rise, but how do we help people have higher health care? And to be branded with a sustainable or active lifestyle. So that's an example of a company leading. They don't have to do this. There's no regulation that says they have to do this, but they want to engage customers like you. They know that young people are very focused on impact and sustainability. There's now an increasing number of investors that want to support that. And they want their business model to be more like nature. They want a circular business model that scales for good. All right, so what does that mean for investing? What it means is any company seeking investment and any investor should get more and more familiar with these 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So is this a concept, Steve, that's covered in school?
Yeah, I don't know if all of the people on the call are familiar, but we certainly cover it for even our undergraduate students.
Got it. Okay, so there's a website for this, the Sustainable Development Goals. It was birthed out of what was originally called the Millennium Development Goals. So before many of you were born, in the year 2000 was the turn, 2000, 2001 was the turn of the millennium. And they're actually goals to help improve the world. And then we got to close to your birth year and we said, we need to do better. And so while you've been growing up in school, these sustainable development goals have been set with goals for 2020 and 2030 and 2040 and 2050. And what's happening now is investors, and Jeff may know about this as well, investors from France and the Netherlands, especially pensions and foundations and endowments, are requiring their investments to report back on these sustainable development goals. And so that means number one is no poverty. So first of all, people need money to live. Now really, number one should be like number 2 and 3, like people should have a meal and have good health. But most people need to buy food, not grow food. So 1, 2, and 3 are, can you eat? Are you healthy? And do you have enough to live? Number 4 is, okay, how do we get a quality education early and along the way, progress to college and graduate degrees like you are? And number 5 is, how do we do that for women as well as men, as well as all genders and gender identities? Number 6 is, which really should be earlier too, how do you drink clean water and how do you sanitize it? And some of you may have heard of the World Toilet Organization. That's a nonprofit. More than 1 and maybe even up to 2 billion people don't have toilets. You may know some of them from growing up in Cambodia. Not everybody has a sanitation system. Number 7 is affordable clean energy. The sun can power everything that we do if we can capture the sun's power, like in a solar panel, and store it in a battery, like Tesla is doing, Tesla, the electric vehicle, and then distribute it. And one of the things we could do is have cars with solar panels on top. That's one of the things Tesla is trying to roll out. Windows on buildings could have solar paint so that they can absorb the energy. Buildings themselves could hold in the heat while letting in the light. Number 8 is around decent work and economic growth. It's really fair pay and worker focused. 9 and 11 are around innovation and sustainable cities. So how do we cluster people together, create new things for the future that will make our lives better? And 10, reduced inequalities, is sort of parallel to number 5 on gender. 10 is from your ethnicity, from your income level, maybe in India, for your caste. How does everybody get an equal opportunity to succeed? Smart people are everywhere. Smart people is not connected with money. That's why, I mean, when given the opportunity, you'll find smart people, capable people everywhere, but not everybody has the same opportunity. 12 is this closed loop system. How does consumption and production not generate waste and have this closed loop system or circular model like VF? 13 is climate. So how do we take positive climate action, stop producing carbon, bring carbon out of the ground, have more sustainable farming where that's a negative carbon model? And how does that link to life below water, not only for fish, but ecosystems, mangroves, and life on land? Salesforce.com is a technology company based here in San Francisco. The CEO of Salesforce.com, Mark Benioff, is leading a campaign to plant 1 trillion trees, to not continue deforestation, but to have reforestation. And you may have seen some of the initiatives in Asia where everybody plants a tree a day. 16 is an interesting one from an investment perspective. How do you invest in peace or justice or strong institutions? And one inspiring quote I think of frequently is Muhammad Yunus, who helped commercialize and scale up microfinance, initially in Bangladesh and then worldwide. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, not the economics prize, but the Nobel Peace Prize. And when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, why do you give a peace prize to microfinance? He said, we create the conditions under which peace can exist. And so why do people fight or have wars? They have wars over economics. They have wars over resources, maybe water, land. So if you create self-sustaining families and economic systems, you increase the probability for peace. Um, and then finally, there's a partnership for the goals. So this is, we can't do this individually or even as one organization. We need partnerships, businesses with other businesses, nonprofits with other nonprofits. Cities and countries need to work together. But we also need to do that across sectors. We need multi-sector partnerships. So, all right, so I'll just pause there. Those are the 17. If Steve or your professors want to give you a hard quiz, they'd ask you to name all 17 and the numbers. But you will benefit, if you care about impact investing, you will benefit from starting to learn and memorize all 17, or at least memorize your favorites. And then if you want to dig in even more, like pick your favorite, pick the problem you want to solve in your lifetime. If you go to the Sustainable Development Goals website, each of these have metrics, quantitative metrics. And these 17 have 169 metrics. So almost like 10 metrics each. Here's one of the challenges for all of us on this call. Not all 170 metrics have data. There's a metric definition, but there's no data. So how could you use your phone to collect data? How could you use artificial intelligence? Is there a role for the blockchain? Is there government data that you could use? So starting to meld real life, and a year ago when COVID broke, we built a COVID model of all 3,000 counties in the United States. And one of the inputs to that model was Google has GPS in your phone, as does Apple. And Google open sourced who was moving geographically with their phone and who was not. And they released that by county, and you could see who was moving and who was not. And in the counties that were moving, that's where COVID was spreading before there were, and those counties also happened to not be wearing masks. And having in Asia lived through SARS and MERS, most people are comfortable doing things for the common good. In the US, some people are more independent and don't care about the whole as much as they care about themselves, which is a sad state. And so data from your phone can be used to observe, maybe predict, and then allocate solutions. Another interesting use of the phone, just as a quick story, is one of my alumni mates from the Wharton School is working in Africa, and specifically working in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, it's one of the 10 largest, most populated countries in the world. And in those 10 in that country, there's a lot of oil, and that oil spills. And so there's a lot of oil spills around Nigeria. Now in biology, there's actual microcosms and bacteria that will eat the oil. And there's actually some that will eat it within 24 hours. So he's part of a business that does this. They sell the microbes and bacteria to an individual, kind of like microfinance. That individual goes to a spot that is polluted with oil. A satellite or drone overhead takes a picture the day before they get there. Using the phone and the GPS, he or she programs in where they put in the bacteria to eat the oil. The next day, 24 hours later, the satellite or drone takes another photo. And you can see visually that the oil is disappearing. And then it releases a payment, like through a blockchain payment, to register that, and that person earns revenue for doing it. That's an amazing business model. And you could do that as a nonprofit, you could do it as a for-profit. So there's many solutions that could be happening. All right, so there's a couple of questions in the box, in the chat box I want to ask. So one is, on the carbon footprint, what do I think about the carbon tax? Also, there may be practices where companies use up more natural resources, have to compensate for those who use less, especially since water and natural resources are meant to be shared. This is exactly right. Our shared natural resources, nature does not yet have a blockchain payment for our use of water, air, bees, or soil. So carbon tax is definitely one way to do it. One of the And I'm in favor of a carbon tax, but it's just there's a charge to nature that we're not yet collecting. And this operates in Canada. There's a carbon tax, Steve, you may be familiar, in British Columbia. And in British Columbia, the west part of Canada, the California of Canada, or I live in the British Columbia of the US, you pay more for gasoline that you put in your car. That tax goes to the government. The government then funds clean energy. So it's a very simple. Now, the downside is the consumer has to pay more, or the business, maybe, if there's price competition. But without that, where's the money supposed to come from? So taxing negative externalities like carbon that then translate into positive externalities can be a good approach. So I'm in favor of carbon tax. I'm also in favor of what you allude to here is a carbon incentive system or carbon credits. And so that's, if you want to know how this works in real life, read the financial statements of Tesla. Tesla generates positive carbon credits that they then sell to other auto companies because Tesla is essentially operating vehicle miles with very low to no carbon, while a internal combustion engine and a gasoline engine is operating vehicle miles and polluting the environment for us all. So those companies polluting have to buy carbon credits from the companies creating a better environment. And in the case of Tesla, until recently, where they've turned profitable by selling cars, they were generating cash flow primarily from the carbon credits while they were still scaling up. So very interesting and real life example. And they do this in different countries and regions in Europe, even in the Northeast United States. So that maybe that could be something you could work on in Cambodia or Southeast Asia or Asia in general. All right, another question from Sokana is, how do we measure impact? How can we quantify qualitative type impact? What is the return on investment of the impact investment considered to be acceptable? So Jeff may have taught you about, in finance, if you took it, about hurdle rates, H-U-R-D-L-E, hurdle rates. Hurdle rates in economics usually mean what's the minimum you have to pay back somebody who loans you money, like in bonds, or who invests in you, like equity. And that's called the cost of capital. But there's not real hurdle rates for impact yet. And this is why Sokana's question is excellent, is what is the hurdle rate? And so earlier when I talked about this 100-point scale that we have at HIP, we think of the hurdle rate as net positive. What are you doing that's net positive for people, net positive for the planet, net positive for trust? And if you're not meeting that hurdle rate, if you're not getting a sustainability score or a ESG, environmental social governance score of 50 or more, then you're hurting rather than helping. And when that capital moves to those venture capital, private equity, stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, when capital moves there, it makes it harder for the negative impact companies to raise money. So much so that in the US, there are prisons, some of them are private. There's been so much pressure from investors now to not fund private prisons that they may not be able to continue operating. So driving the cost of capital up from a negative product and reducing the cost of capital, making it easier for clean companies, that takes investor dollars to move together. So one of our challenges not only is solving these real world problems with the SDGs, one of the problems is how to motivate people to invest in this way and to have a positive. So we'll talk about these measuring impact questions in just a moment. All right, keep those excellent questions coming, very smart. So one car company that says they're addressing all 17 Sustainable Development Goals is a company called General Motors. You might know the Buick brand in Asia. It's very popular in China, especially. General Motors has a sustainability report that is 300 pages long. Some of those pages relate to the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a picture from one of the sustainability reports from General Motors. And they say, they self-report that they're addressing all 17 SDGs. Now, are they really? Is it material? Is it something they do in the whole company? No, but they're trying. So this is a positive intent. And they've been getting beaten so hard on electric vehicles. Now you're going to see they just redid their logo so it looks like an electric plug. They're starting to do partnerships with some electric vehicle companies. They hope to roll out an electric truck. This is an interesting history story because General Motors had electric cars in the 1980s and 1990s, and the traditional forces repressed them from scaling that up. General Motors should own the electric car market, but they didn't. They screwed it up. All right. So here's one interesting thing that's hard to quantify. You may hear leaders of companies, nonprofits, or organizations say, people are our most important asset. The problem is, where are people in the financial statements? And this is one of the chapters in the new book that's out, is on human capital valuation. And this work started back in the 1960s. So there were people in college, PhDs and master's students writing theses on human capital and how to value human capital. Fast forward to today, it's still not around. So you can write an academic paper, it doesn't happen. So it's up to us to create action. Now, some people would say this is a soft measure. This is a qualitative measure. But with surveys and with even monitoring people on their computer, there's a capital conference. There's a human capital conference actually with software tools for this. With enough work on computer, you can measure how engaged employees are. You can tell them when they're doing work or not doing work. You can see who they're emailing. You can see if they're doing social media. You can see if they're setting up meetings with other people in the company. You can map those networks, so like LinkedIn for a company. And when you analyze that data, you can actually get indicators of soft qualitative behavior, human behavior, that at least one company sells a software package that can predict 86% of the people who will leave. And so when people are overworked, they're working in the morning and night on computer, when they're sending lots of emails, they're burning out, you can actually see online that their productivity is going down. They say we can predict 86% of the people who will leave. So that's a quantitative way of a qualitative measure that you can manage. And it can be used for good or it could be used for bad, but that's there. So every year, and this is spread around the world now, there's an organization called Best Companies to Work For. It's a nonprofit based here in San Francisco. There's franchises around the world in Asia and Europe and Latin America. And they track the financial, one of the things they do is to measure the purpose of employees. And then they track, are those companies who are the best to work for financially more successful or financially less successful? And Alex Edmans is a professor at the London Business School. He started this work at Wharton, where I went to school. He's now at London Business School. He's giving a lot of TED Talks, Alex Edmans is. And he's done this research not only in the US that you see here, which is the best companies to work for, where employees are the happiest, actually do make more money for shareholders. He did this for 24 countries, and he analyzed it to see if this relationship was the same. Are the best places to work also the best for investment? And he found out that most of them actually were, except for 2 countries. Anyone want to guess what those 2 countries were, where higher employee satisfaction did not lead to higher investor returns? Feel free to put it in the chat box if you want to guess. What 2 countries did not get excess shareholder returns from happier employees. The two countries are Germany and Denmark. And the reason, contributing reasons why, is in Germany and in Denmark, employees are part of the board. Employees are, there's strong worker equality. And so the reason why the shareholders didn't get those returns is because the employees got those returns. And this all goes back to employees as the most important asset. Now, those companies are still in business. They're not unprofitable. But instead of the shareholders getting the excess profit, the workers are collecting the excess profit. It doesn't have to be 100% one way or the other, but this balance of workers paying suppliers, which include workers who don't work for you, and paying shareholders, those are the different pieces of the pie. And so developing a sustainable business that lasts a long time treats workers well. All right, so, and over time, at least in the US, this can lead to high returns. And unfortunately, over the same time period, workers have not as shareholders have. But those companies have still succeeded. So there's still a balance. So we're doing better. Employees are happier and more productive, but they're not getting all the gains. So it's like those science-based targets. They're not going carbon negative. They're not balancing people's wages with shareholder returns. They are over tilting. And so we still have more work to do here. All right, and we've been operating investment portfolio on this. And every year we update it for the best companies to work for. And in general, it's done very well. And here are some of those companies. So if you're saying, oh, should I work for some of those companies as a multinational corporation? Maybe. So these are companies that you can check out. These are 10 of the best places to work for as of last year. All right, so here's another qualitative element of impact. It's not if workers are happy. It's also, is there equal opportunity? And it suffer from lack of gender diversity. Not as many. Universe over the period 2006 to 2015. It's time for this to get updated and refreshed, but we see this at HIP in our ratings. Companies with more women on the board versus fewer women on the board, companies with more women on the board do better. And they do better because women bring extra thinking power. They bring more scrutiny about risk. They think of this too, but having more diversity in the boardroom, whether by gender or ethnicity, helps improve the finances of a company. So when we invest in companies, we're looking for companies with higher women diversity. Same thing for innovation. So diversity, this is a North Carolina State University academic paper published in 2018, that companies with ethnic diversity from different races or ethnicities innovate twice as much as companies who are not diverse. So that mix of thinking helps shift the culture, but also the output. So twice as much innovation happens. And that the financial performance above the median from ethnically diverse, gender diverse, and combined is 15, 25, 35% better. All right, I'm going to skip over this. So, and one of the interesting things on diversity is another way to measure, how do we measure something qualitative in a quantitative way, are the first and second lines here. This is of the standard, this is of the S&P 500, the 500 largest companies in the US stock market. And what this says is 80 to 90% of companies have a policy about diversity, but less than 15% have targets. So one of the interesting things that as an investor or as a manager is a policy can be in place. It doesn't mean that it's followed. Or even if the policy is in place, it doesn't mean you're getting the results. So we care much more about line number 2 than we do about line number 1. If line number 1 was much lower, we'd care about that more too. But you can have policies, but policies without metrics are nice, but not helpful enough, not helpful enough. And it differs by industry. So what you can see is that diversity policy is the least in like communication, telecom on the left-hand side. Strangely in energy, 100% of energy companies in oil and gas, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, Total, have a diversity policy. 100% of energy companies in the S&P 500. So while it's the best for policy, it's the worst for actual targets. Policy only. We want to see targets, we want to see metrics, we want to see. And what's interesting here is some of the highest targets are in companies with engineers. Engineers are not only in tech companies, like, and what we find over 15 years of doing this now, companies with engineers are sometimes quirky, but companies with engineers who are, and while maybe not all the human capital touch may be there, the system, the thinking of a company as a system or being part of a system, your company being part of a system and your people being part of a system inside your company, engineers think that way. They may not always accomplish the highest soft touch, but they're thinking in a system mentality. So it's important as an impact investor to have a systems view. And that's what I learned. I didn't talk, Steve covered sort of my journey, but I worked not only at McKinsey to think from a systems view, like Steve is familiar with, but I also worked at Ashoka, which is a nonprofit where we funded nonprofit social entrepreneurs. And in funding those nonprofit social entrepreneurs, we were seeking for people who were trying to change the system, to leverage the system. All right. And these gender ratios are, some of them are growing, but not very fast. And some of them are actually, going up and then coming down. So change is hard. And changing the culture and changing behavior is hard. All right, so there's lots of academic papers. Many to most of them show what this Harvard paper from 2011 showed. And we did this even before the Harvard people did it. We did it in 2006, 2007. Sustainable companies generally outperform because they treat people as an asset. They think like nature. They create closed loop systems. And they mimic nature. And they're open and honest and trustworthy. And they're willing to be held accountable. So what we do at HIP as an impact investor is we rate all investments, stocks that are traded on exchanges. We rate 10,000 global equities, including the bonds from governments and schools and hospitals and water utilities. We rate real estate and buildings. Buildings are everywhere. And all asset classes, companies, old companies. And is, can you have a can you have a bad product with a positive management system? Or how do you find out positive products like Tesla? But Tesla doesn't score so well on the right-hand side. So what the challenge is for investing both as a company to build up and an investor to invest in, how do you find positive products with positive management practices and positive operations? There's more examples of negative products with good operations. There's some examples of good products with negative operations. So it makes it really tough. And so that's why you need to go along for the ride to help companies compete. All right, I'll just pause here for questions. I've been doing a lot of talking. I know on video, it's better to have conversation.
This has been really good, Paul. Let's just try to get some people asking. Obviously, a lot of people have been asking in chat as you've gone along, but it's also nice to hear voices also. One of the issues in Cambodia is people don't like to turn on their cameras and they like to prefer to do chat. But again, I like to just try to convince our people to turn on at least their mic anyways and see if there are any questions.
All right, well, I'll keep talking until the questions pop up. So to reinforce this is positive sustainability companies have higher shareholder returns historically, and we expect into the future, but we can't guarantee it. And lower sustainability companies have lower shareholder return or even negative. And this is the case for the 5 years ending 2017, the 5 years ending 2018, higher sustainability, higher profit, lower sustainability, lower profit. In 2019, it was the case, higher sustainability, higher profit, lower sustainability, lower profit. And now, the end of 2019, the middle of 2020, which was weird last summer because of COVID. So you see a lot of companies lagging on return. And as of year end, you see some interesting things start to emerge, which is some of these low sustainability companies. Whoops, sorry, let me get rid of this. They really want me to pay attention. So the highest sustainability companies still do have, but some of these lower sustainability companies in the past year or two, as part of 5 years, they've built up extractive. And this are US based companies. And I think this is reflective of the previous executive administration. They released a lot of environmental constraints. They allowed you to treat people worse. And we thought this might come, and we saw indications of this at the beginning of the Trump administration, and now we're seeing it after 4 years. So some of these lower sustainability companies have done better. We don't think this will last long term, but we'll see. But the highest sustainability companies still do. So Jeff has asked, is there a favorite company in the energy sector? There's a couple interesting ones coming about. So one is called Hannon Armstrong. Now you'd say, Hannon Armstrong, what do? They put in solar panels and renewable energy for governments. Governments are some of the slowest moving, but they have big dollars. And actually militaries can be fast movers, because when you have a military, you need to be self-sufficient for energy. You can't just plug in on location. If you want to bring fuel, you have to bring it with you. So having battery power that's rechargeable from wind, solar, maybe hydro is important. So Hannon Armstrong is one of those, not serving the military staff, but serving military bases and other government operations. So that's one, and that's one that went up, almost doubled in 2020. We've been invested in it for quite a while, for several years. It's been very good to us and our clients and investors. Another energy company that is back on the radar, and this is like fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. British Petroleum is saying that they're going to go all renewable. So something to watch for. We'll see if that's true, because they started doing it in the 1990s. They did it till about 2000, and then they put in the waste bin all the renewables, and they went full bore on oil. ExxonMobil did this in 1970s as well. ExxonMobil, including during the US President Jimmy Carter, funded all forms of renewables, biogas, batteries, hydrogen. And then in 1980, new administration took the solar panels off the White House in the US, and Exxon went full bore into oil. And part of that was they couldn't afford the R&D anymore because oil hit $9 a barrel. So at that time, which was still cheap. Other energy companies are ones you don't think of as energy. Tesla. Tesla is an energy company. Tesla is an energy that captures renewable energy, stores it, and powers vehicles with it. People call Tesla an automotive company, but Tesla is an automotive company, an energy company, and maybe even an artificial intelligence company. And if you want to think like that, you can look at Cathie Wood and the ARC funds that focus on innovation. Those are some favorites in energy. There's also something called Generate Capital that funds solar, wind, and other renewable projects. So you're going to see a lot more of that spread globally. All right, so that's energy. There's also some interesting energy companies. National Grid is a company that focuses on transmission and distribution. And then what's interesting is, will automotive companies also become energy companies, either from electric vehicles or from like hydrogen fuels? But my big theme, and this started with the wildfires, not only in California, but in Australia, and really applies now during pandemic, is decentralized self-sufficiency. I'll type it in the chat box since those are all big words. Decentralized self-sufficiency means pretend we're back in the caveman age. How do you get your energy? How do you get your food? How do you take care of yourself for healthcare? How do you become self-sufficient? And with more climate change and less climate action, or with food systems at risk from climate action, how can you grow food inside? How do you power yourself? How do you have backup power in case the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow? So decentralized self-sufficiency, I think, will be a core investment theme that more people may apply. All right, somebody asked about learning more about the impact investment in a circular economy. So there's some foundations doing this on circular economy. So look up those, look that up in Google. And then there's something called closed loop partners that you can look up as well. And what closed loop partners do is work with companies. So, and companies fund, not donate, companies out of their treasury fund closed loop waste systems so that they're not polluting the environment, but they're also turning it into a revenue center. So grocery stores and restaurants have food waste. If they throw that waste out, they're throwing money out. Some grocery stores sell either their unsold food, or if they prepare food, their food waste, to composters, and they change a cost center into a revenue center and a potential profit center. That's one of the keys to impact investing, is think like nature. Nature doesn't have any waste. All waste is somebody's food. Think about how to monetize it and how to do so in a sustainable or regenerative way. That's how to design a good business with good products, good management systems, good operating metrics. Also, there's something called Donut Economics. That's another book you could read. It's by a woman, Kate Rayworth. Economics. So that's something about this closed loop system. And so it's called a donut in that everything's connected together. So at McKinsey, Steve and I used to draw these arrows of like what the business flow system is: inputs, manufacturing, distribution, retail, waste. We can't draw one-way arrows anymore. We have to draw donuts. We have to draw circles. All right, next question is for data collection, is HIP as an impact rater going to collect the data on the ground level, or the companies provide relevant data upon request? Great question. This is, I think, some of the opportunities for each of you to think about, if you're passionate about this, how this might fit in your career journey. Either to capture what's already there. Remember, I talked about employees on computers. You can get a sense for whether they're getting stressed or not. That's something you could use as a manager. There might be privacy concerns or issues or abuses to manage. So we get data from a number of different sources. We get data from the companies themselves. We usually get accurate data from companies themselves because, being a public company of 10,000 companies that we cover, if you lie and you get caught, there's usually a downside. You usually get fired. Whoever does it gets fired. Your stock price goes down. So like when Volkswagen Cars lied about its pollution systems, it lost 35% of its stock value in one day. Then you get penalized by the government. So there was a initial penalty of $18,000 US per car as the penalty. That turned into not cash, but something else. And you lose trust. Like, customers don't care. They want to buy a different product. They don't want to be associated with it. So we usually get data from companies. 99 to 99.9% of companies don't lie. They might not reveal something, but they generally don't lie because the downside is too much. We get data from nonprofits. So Carbon Disclosure Project is a nonprofit, CDP. They actually have been getting companies to voluntarily describe their carbon or water or now forests for going on 20 years. So with no regulation and no mandate, they got, at this nonprofit, got large companies to voluntarily share this information. So awesome job. Then we get data from governments. So some governments have safety organizations or environmental organizations, and then they make that data public. So businesses data, nonprofit data, government data. Then academics produce data. So customer satisfaction data is produced by academics like the University of Michigan, and actually the National University of Singapore does this as well, contribute to the customer satisfaction tracking. And then there's third parties who collect data, who go and make a business out of collecting something that's interesting. Some of the bigger businesses are like credit card companies, and then they sell what people are buying. But we just talked about Google and mobility data, so selling where people are moving. There's even companies who buy satellites and then measure how many, back before the pandemic, how many cars were in the parking lot, and then make an estimate of what revenue sales would be. But what's more interesting, like we talked about earlier, is what are people metrics? What are environmental metrics? What are trust metrics? And how are people being treated? So there was an organization called Labor Voices that existed, where in Cambodia, in Bangladesh, and Turkey, they, no matter what type of phone you'd have, they'd take employee surveys of who was in the factory. And then they would contract with companies to let them know what's going on in their supply chain. And the supply chain, sometimes is pretty deep. If you have shoes, there's assemblers of those shoes. But before the shoes, there's leather and cotton. And then there's a cotton farm or a leather facility. So companies don't know what's happening all the way through. So that's additional data. That's not as easy to get because a lot of those companies are private or family owned. So what we do at HIP is we try and bring as much of that together as possible. And when you put a puzzle together, you may not have all the pieces. It's the same thing with impact. You don't have 100% of the pieces. But the more pieces you have, and this is what applies on this chart that you're looking at too, when companies are transparent, it usually means they're willing to be held accountable. When they're willing to be held accountable, they usually want to be held accountable to good things. So the combination of transparency of data from all those sources, from the performance, increasing performance and momentum, then leads to accountability. And what we find is companies that are transparent, perform, and willing to be held accountable generally have higher returns, and the ones that don't generally have lower returns. And when all that capital flows to those more sustainable companies, it makes it harder for those lower sustainability companies to compete. So it creates this incentive to do better all the time. All right, there's a follow-up question. How do you even know they falsify the data in the first place? It took a few years to find out about Volkswagen. This is all true. This is true. But companies are made up of people, and there's something called a whistleblower. Most people want to do good. Most people are not evil or negative oriented. Some are, but not all. So when companies do something bad, usually they report it internally. This actually happened with Boeing. Boeing, the aircraft maker that had the airplane, 2 of which crashed. That should have never happened. That was corruption. There were some indicators of getting there because there were some whistleblowers in one of the plants that they moved to make a non-union plant. And as you saw Boeing become more financially engineering rather than aircraft engineering, they biased themselves to financial engineering. Those are companies you want to avoid. Now, I can't say that we sold Boeing before the crashes, but we definitely sold it after because it was only going to get worse. And one of the stories that came out was the CEO of Qatar Airlines in the Middle East, Qatar Airways CEO. You can look this up online to Boeing. He got a aircraft delivered to Qatar Airlines that had hammers and pliers and tools in the aircraft. And he found out about it and he got angry and mad. And he called up the Boeing CEO and he said, if you want me to buy one more aircraft from you, you need to put me on video like Zoom here. And I want to talk to every employee in your company at once. And so they had an all-company meeting of tens of thousands of employees with the Qatar Airways CEO. And he said, do not ever deliver an aircraft to me like that again. So these are the consequences that happen. At the time, you may not happen. There's internal forces that sometimes fix it before. But there are examples like Enron for energy or Volkswagen for cars. You know, the Volkswagen thing, that is probably up to the CEO. They still haven't proven it yet. But this is what happens with very large companies sometimes. Germany employs, remember we talked about employees having a seat on the board. When this got discovered, Germany did not arrest the Volkswagen CEO because they didn't want to suffer the consequences of the impact on the employees in their economy. So this is why we need global systems for accountability, because it actually took the US to start pulling. This is a great story overall, if you don't know it. How Volkswagen was discovered was by students. So this is a very important story. I hope you'll remember this for a long time. And this is a public story too, so you can read about it. 2 graduate students bought 3 vehicles to test if what was being reported as the fuel efficiency was correct and how that fuel efficiency changed in roads that went up and down. And so in the US and West Virginia, there's roads that go up and down. So they bought 3 cars and they had student grant budget. So they couldn't choose what they bought. They had to buy what they could afford. So they bought 1 BMW and 2 Volkswagens. And what they found was they attached their own sensor. So this is how deep research can go, is to do your own diligence. This is the case for any investing. The more research you can do, the better off you can be. When they tested these 3 cars, the fuel efficiency did not line up with what was stated. And so they tested it again, and then they tested it again. And they reported to their professor and they're like, well, this is weird, let's call the company. And the company is like, oh, you have a bad sensor. That's impossible. And the students said, no, this is what we're finding. So the students finally took it to the government, to the EPA. And then the EPA started doing tests. And what the cheating was in Volkswagen was the engineers, this is how creative humans are, when they would do the test for the fuel efficiency, they'd put it up on a rack, like when you take your car to the shop, and they'd test the fuel efficiency. They didn't test it on the actual road. And what the engineers inside Volkswagen did was to program when the car wasn't moving, when your phone isn't moving, to fake one set of information and engine setting, and then when the car was moving, to let it pollute. That was all discovered by graduate students with a small grant doing their own testing to see if people are telling the truth. That should have never happened at Volkswagen, but it did. And it was pretty systemic, and it probably goes all the way to the top, but we may never know. But in general, what we found, we've been doing this for 15 years, people tell the truth because they know if they don't tell the truth, they're going to get caught. And when they do get caught, there's going to be big consequences. But that's why we ingest lots of different data too. And when it doesn't line up, it makes us ask questions. So we are generally, we're a mix of trust and skepticism. And then we make the best decision. And as you can see right here on this chart, at least for the past couple of years, it might be that less sustainable companies do better, even for 5 years. But we don't, that probably won't last. It might, but it probably won't. All right, another question is, and I know we're getting to almost the end of time here. What do you think of Chevron in terms of its environmental issues? Okay, this is another good, juicy question. Chevron actually is one of the most diverse. Remember when I showed you these diversity numbers up here? Chevron actually does pretty good. Chevron has a diverse board. They have diverse new hires. They have diverse managers. And they do it globally. But Chevron also does things like in Ecuador and in the Western Amazon, try and gain leases to drill under native indigenous lands to get the oil. And sometimes they do that with the cooperation of the government. So it's complicated. And so some of the environmental issues that they're trying to address, this is happening at Shell. It's happening somewhat at Chevron, more at Shell, is when they're having decisions about how to allocate capital, you need a hurdle rate not only for finance, but you also need a hurdle rate for the environment. So there's an actual greenhouse gas assessment that's done. And if it does not pass at Shell and a little bit at Chevron, if it does not pass the greenhouse gas hurdle rate, that project will not move forward until they have a new technology to do so. Chevron also has to, Chevron tries to produce the least polluting gasoline, if that's an actual way to describe it. But it's still a gasoline company and a chemical company. That's the other thing about a big energy company, is it makes chemicals. Chemicals can actually be okay, depending on how you design them and how you produce them. But they're still, if the feedstock is fossil fuel, then the end result is net negative for the environment. All right, I know we're at our appointed time. Steve, do you want to go any further? Or?
Maybe we can just see if there's any last minute questions. I mean, let me just ask one quickly, because you mentioned Volkswagen. How about Volvo? We have a large Volvo dealership, actually right beside our university. I know originally, obviously, a Swedish company, but now has been taken over by a Chinese firm. And Volvo used to have a very good reputation for safety, for a lot of different factors. So I'm just curious, now that they're owned by one of the large Chinese manufacturers taken over, do you ever come across them? How do they now, how are they as a company in terms of some of your ratings and rankings?
Yeah, several companies, including Volvo now, are committing, and this is driven by Europe mandating this as well. Countries mandating there cannot be internal combustion engines fueled by oil or gas beyond 2035, 2040, 2045, 2050. So Volvo is known for making safe cars. That's one of their key offers to customers. But now they seem to be committed to doing that. And being owned by a Chinese company could potentially accelerate their move to electric vehicles. So, and so it probably what one of the desires of the Chinese owners is to bring that engineering skill and automotive engineering skill and history and experience into the Chinese market to produce vehicles both for local and export sales. So Volvo, I guess I should, at the HIP Investor site, if you go there, we have a portal and you can look up a handful of companies. If you're going to use it in class, we could expand the universe or focus it in on, region or certain types of companies. But we have a portal we can look up the scores, and it's based on the HIP Investor book, so you got to know the HIP Investor methodology to do that. But it's basically, like we talked about earlier, about the products, the operations, and the management practices. And then you'll see 0 to 100 scores. Given Volvo's internal combustion engine that generally rates below 50, the industry rates about a 35 out of 100. Both in producing the engine and burning the fuel and the like. Whereas a Tesla rates an 80 for product.
Yeah.
But then the company, Volvo, pays its people well. It's generally, they do well on safety. I don't recall what they are on equality. It tends to rate better. Whereas Tesla doesn't always do best, by its manufacturing employees, for example. It may do better by its engineers. So all those get combined together, and on the HIP Investor portal, you can see some of those sub-scores and sub-metrics, but that's how we put it together. So we overall tilt towards good products, and we want to support good management practices and operations for people, planet, and trust. But there's not enough companies that do that. So what we do in our ratings and in our strategies and portfolios is tilt towards those that do more good, may not be perfect, but doing better. And like we showed earlier, that are striving to get to 100% by 2030. But also, there aren't enough of those to build a diversified portfolio, so we got to invest in these other ones who are getting better. And we need to avoid the ones that are not doing anything. And then hopefully that puts pressure on them to say, hey, we're getting left behind, we have to do something.
Okay, so are there any questions? Just trying to open it up now and just see. Okay, Jeff is just thanking you in the chat here. Does anyone want to can we close with one final question? I'm just going to put a bit of pressure on. Not a chat question, with a mic question.
Hardcore on a Saturday morning after a Friday night, studying, of course.
I can go. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Yeah, it's Huang from Cambodia. We used to meet during the trip. And I sent you.
I'm so glad to hear you again.
Thank you. Post some question on the chat box as well. So one last final questions, and also I'm interested in impact investing as well. But then there's a lot of not clear-cut differences of different investment model, like responsible investment, socially responsible and green investment, and also impact investment. So what do you suggest to is there any a clear definition for each category?
Yeah, okay, so good question. One of the challenges of innovation is the innovators all want to call it something different at different points in time. I like the term impact because it's short, it's 6 letters, 2 syllables. You say impact to most people, all of them have even conservative people have a view of impact. You may not agree with their view, but they can agree on impact as a word. When you say socially responsible, that conveys goodness, but some people hear that as socialism and have a negative reaction to it. Some firms have called it responsible investing. So who wants to be irresponsible? Nobody wants to be irresponsible. So But so it might be called different things to different people. But I think your desire is, where do you want to work in the most innovative products, which might be new and might not even succeed, but work there and maybe invest there. And it's high risk, but high reward. So imagine if you're one of the first investors in Tesla, you could probably be rich. Or Beyond Meat, which makes plant-based meat. But there's a lot of, like in Vietnam next door, there's a lot of agriculture, like urban agriculture. And that has to catch on. We have to feed cities, and we may not have farms, and we need to be self-sufficient. So that's one way, is like, where do you want to be on risk? And where do you want to be on impact? And so impact cuts across all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But maybe you would just want to pick one of those. And your impact investing might be sustainable farmland, or it might be renewable fish, or it might be clean buildings. So it could be at a high level across many sectors and industries, or it could be inside a product or an industry. Just solving this question of, what is the impact we want? How do we want the world to be better? And can we, if we can engineer how to pollute the earth, we can engineer how to not pollute the earth. And if we can engineer a business model, there are impactful business models that make money, ultimately. Any business is hard. Doing an impact business is even harder. Doing an impact portfolio is a little easier because you have multiple choices, but you may not have a lot of choices. What I can tell you is I'm fulfilled every day in what I do. We get to vote with our money. We get to hold back our money from things we don't like. We get to allocate money to things we do like. It may not always work, but we know we're at least trying to solve the problem. And that's better than, I think, traditional finance, which is just how to squeeze some extra profit out, which usually comes from a person or nature or trust. And I'd rather make less money, maybe overall, but know that I'm helping people, helping the planet, and helping build trust. So hopefully you do too. Hopefully each of you will do more of that in a business or government or a nonprofit or academia or as an investor. But excited to each of you can join us and maybe listen again if I said something too fast, or I'll share the slides as well. But delighted that we could be together on video. I could time travel to tomorrow on Saturday. I'll catch up to you soon. And I hope to welcome you back to San Francisco in the future, or to visit you in Cambodia.
Thank you, Paul. This was, a great session. And again, thanks a lot for spending, I know it's your Friday evening, so giving up your Friday evening in San Francisco to be with our students here this morning. And again, it was great to, to visit you last year in San Francisco, and to actually have our students meet you in person and hear your talk. And of course, we hope to bring our second class back, I hope, after COVID, after the vaccine. But again, I really appreciate your time, and also just the passion and energy you have for this subject. And I encourage our students to get your latest book. And we'll try to also order some copies of Impact Investing for our library here at NUM Social Innovation Lab. So we should be able to make that happen in the next couple of months. I guess we cannot order on Amazon right now. I think it's only the Kindle. I don't think the hard copy is available on the physical. I'll have to check on that, but I'm sure we can get it from other sources.
Okay, yeah, and if you put in the ISBN number into the search engine, you may find, the bookstores could order it. It's definitely in Taiwan and Japan and Singapore.
Okay, so again, thank you very much, and looking forward to connecting soon. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, you too. Good to see you, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. Bye.